It wasn't as if I hated my life. Hate was far too strong a word. No, I had made my peace with it long ago, settling into the quiet rhythms of my days like a river carving its path through stone. 53 years of existence, much of it spent raising children who had since flown far from my nest. My husband and I had divorced amicably a decade ago, and though the silence of my house had been deafening at first, it eventually became a companion of sorts. Mornings were for reading or tending to my small garden. Afternoons were punctuated by the predictable shuffle of errands, a visit to the pharmacy, a stop at the library, and always the grocery store on Thursdays. The store was neither charming nor modern. It was just a place to cross items off my list. My cart never brimmed, just a few essentials for one, and maybe a treat if I felt indulgent. That Thursday seemed no different at first. I wandered the aisles with practiced efficiency, mentally organizing my meals for the week. In the produce section, I weighed an avocado in my hand, assessing its ripeness. That's when I saw him. He stood by the apples, tall and broad-shouldered, with a faint scruff on his jawline that suggested he hadn't yet succumbed to the demands of adulthood's clockwork. Perhaps late 20s, early 30s at most. His olive-green sweater clung to him in a way that made me notice the strength of his frame. But what caught me most was the way he examined each apple, as if he were selecting a precious gem. I must have lingered too long. He looked up, and his gaze caught mine. Warm brown eyes, steady and unguarded. He smiled, a small, polite curve of his lips, but it lit up his face in a way that made my breath catch. "Are avocados supposed to feel soft or firm?" he asked, holding one aloft. I blinked, startled out of my thoughts. "Soft, but not too soft," I replied, my voice slightly higher than I intended. He laughed lightly, a sound that somehow felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Got it. Thanks." I turned back to my own shopping, but the moment stayed with me, like the warmth of a fire lingering on your skin long after you've stepped away. By the time I reached the checkout line, I realized I was smiling. A small smile, yes, but the kind that made me feel strangely lighter. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something, and it was enough to make my routine feel just a little less predictable that I didn't expect to see him again. Grocery stores are full of fleeting encounters, strangers brushing past one another in the aisles, never to cross paths again. But life, it seemed, had other plans. The following Thursday, there he was, back in the produce section. This time, he wasn't studying apples but oranges, turning them over in his hands with the same meticulous care. I might not have noticed him if he hadn't looked up at just the right moment. "Hey, avocado expert," he called out, grinning as if we were old friends. I chuckled, startled by how easily he remembered me. "Back for more produce tips." "Clearly," he said, holding up an orange. "What's the trick here? Do I go for color, weight, or just guess and hope for the best?" I stepped closer, feeling oddly self-conscious but amused by his earnestness. "Weight, mostly. A heavier orange usually means it's juicier." "Noted." He selected one and placed it gently in his basket. "Thanks again." "You're welcome," I said, lingering for a moment before moving on. But he wasn't done. As I turned to leave, he asked, "Do you shop here often?" The question caught me off guard, though I couldn't say why. It was harmless enough. "Every Thursday," I replied. "Same here," he said. "I just moved to the area." This place seemed decent enough. His openness disarmed me. It wasn't flirtation, at least not in the traditional sense. It was just friendliness, pure and simple. Before I knew it, we were talking about the store, the neighborhood, and the weather of all things. His name, I learned, was Adam. Our conversation didn't last long, perhaps 5 minutes, but it left me feeling oddly buoyant. As I walked to my car, I caught myself replaying his voice in my mind. It had a warmth to it, like the first sip of tea on a cold morning. The next week, I found myself wondering if he would be there. I told myself I was being silly. Grown women don't look for sparks in the produce aisle. But when I saw him again, this time by the bakery, my heart leapt in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Back for more wisdom?" I teased as I approached. "Actually, yes," he said, holding up a baguette. "How do you tell if one of these is fresh?" "Tap it," I replied. "It should sound hollow." He did as instructed, grinning as the bread produced a satisfying thunk. "Perfect. You're like my grocery sensei." I laughed, surprised by how easily the sound escaped me. We ended up talking again, this time for much longer. He told me about his new job at a nearby design firm and his love for cooking, which explained his obsession with picking the best ingredients. I told him about my garden, and how I still baked my grandmother's bread recipe every Sunday. By the time we parted, I felt a strange warmth settling in my chest, a sense of connection I hadn't realized I was missing. It was just friendship, I told myself. A small, lovely friendship with a kind young man. But even then, a small part of me knew it was becoming something more. It happened on a quiet evening, a Tuesday, when I least expected it. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping tea, and watching the late afternoon light stretch lazily across the floor. The house was still as it often was. No children's laughter or clatter of footsteps, just the hum of life quietly passing by. I felt at ease in my solitude, a peace I had cultivated over the years. But that night, something lingered beneath the surface, a restlessness I couldn't shake. It was just a few days after my last encounter with Adam, when he had invited me to join him for coffee after our chat in the bakery aisle. We had spent an hour at the cafe around the corner, talking about everything and nothing. He was easy to talk to, his smile infectious, and his warmth felt like a balm to my long untended heart. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself, but something had shifted inside me. The way his eyes caught the light when he laughed, the way his voice softened when he talked about the things he loved, it wasn't just friendliness. I felt it, a gentle stirring in my chest that was unfamiliar, yet comforting. It was desire. I hadn't let myself feel that for years. Not since my marriage had faded into routine. Not since the last real connection I'd had with a man had slipped away with time. But Adam, there was something about him that drew me in. I tried to push the thought aside, telling myself it was ridiculous. I was too old for him, too set in my ways. What did I have to offer someone like him? The questions swirled in my mind, but no matter how hard I tried to dismiss them, they wouldn't go away. It wasn't just physical attraction, though there was that. It was more the way he made me feel alive again, like I wasn't just a woman in her 50s, drifting quietly through life. When I spoke with him, I felt seen. Not as someone's mother or ex-wife, but as a woman, a person, not defined by age or expectation. That evening, as I sat alone in my kitchen, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had feelings for him, real, undeniable feelings. It scared me. I wasn't the type of woman who courted drama or sought the approval of others, but the thought of what people might say, what he might think, was terrifying. Age gaps were never something to be taken lightly. It felt like a betrayal of my own self-worth to even consider it. I had no business feeling this way, but still there it was, the ache in my chest, the quiet longing that refused to be silenced. I wanted more of him, more of this unexpected connection. And that terrified me more than anything else. The feeling was there now, and it wouldn't be ignored. I couldn't just pretend it didn't exist. I had to face it. Whatever it meant, the days that followed were filled with a strange tension. Every time I saw Adam, whether at the grocery store or in passing on the street, something inside me would tighten, a knot of excitement and anxiety. It was as if the very air around us had changed. I could no longer look at him without feeling a flutter in my chest, and every time he smiled or laughed, I felt a warmth that made my heart race. But then, just as quickly, a wave of doubt would crash over me, and the excitement would turn to discomfort. I was too old for him. That thought became a mantra, repeating itself over and over in my mind. He had so much life ahead of him, and what was I? A woman whose youth had faded, whose dreams had already been lived, and who was now standing on the edge of something she had long since buried. The societal judgments whispered in my ear like a constant murmur. People would talk. They always did. They would see me as desperate, as some kind of caricature of a woman clinging to the last remnants of her youth. And Adam, what would he think? Was he just being kind? Did he even see me as more than an older friend, someone to talk to when he was lonely or bored? These questions plagued me. The warmth I felt when I was with him was quickly smothered by my insecurities, by the overwhelming fear of what it could mean. What was I hoping for, really? That he might feel the same way? That this quiet, everyday man could see beyond the years between us and find something in me worth loving? I caught myself thinking about him more than I should have. When I went to bed at night, his face appeared in my thoughts, his laughter ringing in my ears. I wondered what it would be like to feel his arms around me, to kiss him, to be more than just someone he talked to about oranges and bread. But even in my fantasies, guilt crept in. I was crossing an invisible line, stepping into territory that society had drawn for me, and it was terrifying. I tried to keep things casual, to pretend I could ignore the feelings blossoming inside me. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was simply enjoying a friendship, a connection that anyone would cherish. But every time we spoke, the attraction, the desire grew. And so I kept my distance. I didn't reach out to him as much, didn't invite him for coffee again. I told myself it was for the best, that I wasn't being fair to either of us. But in the quiet of my apartment, when the world outside had faded into stillness, I could feel him there, like a presence in the air. His warmth, his energy, his gentleness, everything about him called to me. I had never felt more alive, and yet I had never felt so conflicted. What was I supposed to do with this? I didn't know. It was a Tuesday morning when I made the decision. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my tea, when the thought struck me with such force I nearly dropped my cup. I couldn't keep running from this feeling. I couldn't hide from it any longer. I had spent so many days tangled in my own fears, my own doubts. But I knew I had to act. If this was going to go anywhere, if I was going to see if there was something real between us, I needed to take a step forward. To allow myself to be vulnerable, even if it terrified me. It started innocently enough. I had invited him over before, in passing, as part of a casual exchange. But this time it felt different. There was a weight behind it. The simple act of inviting him into my home felt like an opening, a door that, once unlocked, could never be shut again. The thoughts rushed through my mind as I prepared for the phone call. Should I make it about something harmless? Perhaps we could cook together, as he had mentioned his love for food. He talked about wanting to try some new recipes, and I thought, maybe this was my way in. Something casual but meaningful. But when the words finally left my lips, I surprised myself with their directness. Would you like to come over sometime this week? I could use some help with dinner. The hesitation hung in the air for a moment, a pause that stretched too long. But then, his voice came through the receiver, warm and easy as always. I'd love to. How about Friday? I tried not to smile too widely, but it was impossible to hide the excitement bubbling up inside me. Friday. It felt like fate, like the universe was offering me the chance to take control, to open a door that had been cautiously closed for so long. But even as I agreed, even as I hung up the phone and began to plan what we might cook, the nerves began to take hold. This was more than just dinner. This was something else entirely. I wasn't inviting him over just to share a meal. I was inviting him into my life, into the quiet spaces where I had lived alone for so long. I cleaned my apartment obsessively that week, as though by making everything perfect, I could control what would happen. I set the table, adjusted the lighting, even brought out my grandmother's china, an heirloom I rarely used. The gesture felt symbolic, a way of making this feel special. But even as I prepared, doubt continued to gnaw at me. What if he saw me as nothing more than a friendly acquaintance? What if this was just a casual meeting, one of many, that would fade into nothing? What if I misread everything? Every laugh, every glance, every moment we'd shared. And yet, despite all the doubts, there was a spark inside me, a whisper that told me to trust the feeling in my chest, to embrace the possibility of something more. Friday arrived, and with it, an excitement that buzzed through my veins. I dressed carefully, choosing something simple but flattering. The moment I opened the door and saw him standing there, holding a bottle of wine in his hand, the air between us seemed to change. "Hi," he said, his smile warm and genuine, as if he too felt the weight of the moment. "Hi," I replied, my voice soft. For a moment, we simply stood there, looking at one another. It was like time slowed down, and I knew this was it. This was the moment that would change everything. The evening unfolded like a slow dance, deliberate, gentle, yet carrying an undercurrent of something far deeper. We started in the kitchen, a natural place for both of us. Adam had brought a bottle of red wine, and we opened it together, the sound of the cork pulling free marking the beginning of a new chapter. The warmth of the kitchen, the soft clink of glasses, and the rhythm of chopping vegetables, these were the small, intimate gestures that made me realize how easy it was to be with him. As we cooked, the conversation flowed naturally. We didn't speak in grand gestures or declarations, but in the small details that formed the fabric of our connection. He told me about his childhood, how his mother had taught him to cook, how he remembered the smell of her famous lasagna filling their house on Sundays. I shared stories of my own childhood, how my grandmother had filled my home with the smell of freshly baked bread, a memory I carried with me every time I stepped into the kitchen. There was something magnetic about the way we spoke, the ease with which our lives intertwined in those simple stories. Every word felt like a thread, weaving us closer together. The meal we prepared was simple: a roasted chicken with vegetables, a salad tossed with lemon and olive oil, but it felt like a masterpiece. We ate slowly, savoring each bite, savoring the quiet moments that came between the words. The wine made everything feel softer, as if the walls that I'd carefully built over the years were gently dissolving. And then, as we reached the end of the meal, Adam placed his fork down, and for the first time that evening, his eyes met mine with an intensity that made my heart skip. "I'm glad I came here tonight," he said, his voice low and sincere. I smiled, trying to remain composed, though my pulse had quickened. "Me too," I replied. We lingered at the table for a while longer, our conversation slowing to a comfortable quiet. The clock ticked on, but time seemed to stretch, as if the world outside had forgotten about us. And then, just as I began to think the evening was drawing to a close, he reached across the table, his hand brushing lightly against mine. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't even intentional, perhaps. But the moment his skin touched mine, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. I tried not to react, to stay composed, but my breath caught in my throat. "I hope this isn't too forward," Adam said, his voice slightly strained, "but I'd like to kiss you." It was a simple request, but in that moment, it felt like the most profound thing he could have said. My heart raced, and every doubt I had felt in the past weeks, the fear of the age gap, the uncertainty of what this might mean, faded into the background. All that was left was the connection between us, the undeniable pull that had been growing between us since the moment we first met. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I leaned forward slightly, giving him the space to close the distance between us. His lips were warm and soft, and when they met mine, everything else seemed to fall away. It was a kiss that was gentle yet full of longing, like a promise whispered between two souls that had finally found each other. When we pulled away, we didn't speak at first. We didn't need to. The moment had said everything. The world outside was still there, waiting. But in that space, in that kitchen, in that quiet room, nothing else mattered. I had opened the door, and Adam had stepped through. Together, we had crossed a threshold, and whatever came next, whatever it meant, was something we would figure out together. The days that followed were filled with a strange kind of clarity. I had never expected to find myself here, not at this age, not with someone so much younger, and certainly not in a way that felt so right. As the days turned into weeks, the initial rush of emotion from our first kiss faded into a deeper, quieter understanding. The love that was beginning to bloom between us was not flashy or dramatic. It was subtle, gentle, like the slow growth of a tree whose roots are steadily spreading deep into the earth. But even as the connection deepened, my mind continued to wrestle with questions. The age gap that once seemed so insurmountable began to feel insignificant in the face of what we had. And yet, society's whispers, those quiet judgments, still lingered. There were moments when I caught myself wondering how others might view us. Would they see me as foolish, desperate, or would they see us the way I saw us, as two people whose hearts had simply found each other, regardless of time or age? But Adam never seemed concerned about it. He was open, eager, always treating me with the respect and care that a younger man, especially one with such a strong sense of self, could bring. He never once made me feel small or out of place. If anything, he treated me as though I was the most important person in his life. And that, in itself, was a gift I hadn't realized I was missing. As I reflected on this unexpected love, I began to see the beauty in what we had. Love, in its truest form, wasn't confined to age or time. It wasn't something bound by the rules society had created for us. It was something far more fluid, more human. It was about connection. About finding someone who saw you for exactly who you were, not for the number of years you'd lived. I had spent so many years burying the hope of ever feeling this way again. After the end of my marriage, after raising my children, I had accepted that love was a thing of the past for me, a beautiful memory, but no longer a possibility. But Adam had reminded me that love didn't follow a script. It wasn't something that could be boxed into neat, tidy expectations. It was something that simply happened when you least expected it. One evening, as we sat together on my couch, I found myself asking him, almost in disbelief, "How did you know it would work?" He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. I didn't. I just knew that whatever the world thought, whatever anyone else said, it didn't matter. All that matters is how we feel when we're together. His words hit me like a wave. It was as though he had taken all my fears and doubts and turned them into something tangible, something I could hold on to. I realized, in that moment, that love didn't have to make sense to anyone else. It only had to make sense to us. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped worrying about what the world might think. I embraced this love, this unexpected, beautiful thing that had entered my life. I didn't have to explain it or justify it. It was mine and it was real. In that quiet space, in the warmth of his presence, I understood that love was timeless. It had no age, no rules. It simply existed, and it would continue to grow, regardless of what anyone else thought. As I look back on everything, I realize how much this journey has transformed me. The woman I was before Adam entered my life, quiet, reserved, content in the routine of my days. Feels like someone I barely recognize. In some ways, she was safe. She hid behind the walls she built, fearing vulnerability, afraid of opening herself up to something so unpredictable, so powerful. But now, I've learned that it's in those moments of uncertainty, in the spaces where fear and hope collide, that life truly happens. Adam's presence in my life has been nothing short of a revelation. He has reminded me that love is not a limited resource, that it doesn't dry up with age or experience. It doesn't care about the years between us, or the labels others might place on us. It's simply a force, something that draws people together, regardless of their pasts, their ages, or the time they have left. We live in a world that loves to put people in boxes, to judge based on appearances, and to hold up ideals that don't always reflect the depth of the human heart. But love, true, unfiltered love, cannot be confined by societal norms. It is messy, complicated, and sometimes even inconvenient. But it's also worth every second, every risk, every breath. In the quiet moments with Adam, when we talk about the future, about dreams and possibilities, I realize that I am no longer afraid. I've learned to embrace the unknown, to lean into the love that has found me, no matter the timing or the circumstances. This love has taught me to challenge expectations, to trust in what feels true and right in my heart, not what the world says is acceptable. It has reminded me that love doesn't age, doesn't wither, it only deepens and grows. And though I can't predict what the future holds, I know one thing for certain. I am living in a love that is real, that is mine, and that will never be defined by anything other than the truth of our connection. So to anyone who wonders if it's ever too late to find love, to step outside the lines and follow your heart, let me tell you it's never too late. Love is always there, waiting for you to find it. Whether you're 20 or 50, love has no expiration date. It's simply about being open to it, about allowing it to unfold in its own time, in its own way. I'm not just living a second chance at love. I'm living the life I never knew was possible, a life full of wonder, warmth, and a connection so pure that it transcends everything else. And for that, I will be forever grateful.